Well, we're at April the 17th, and I thought I would do a kind of an update on the Dereck Chauvin trial for the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Months ago, I did a video on my impressions at the time. Of course, I hadn't seen much of the evidence, but I've watched a significant amount of the trial, and also I've watched some of the summaries on Watching the Watchers. So I have a lot more, little bit more perspective on it than I had before. And that is that one thing I didn't see, I only saw the video that was taken by one of the people that were, yelling at the police officers, that is facing Chauvin head on, that particular one. And that one, it looks as if Floyd is being left on his side. And my thought was that this whole knee on the shoulder, neck, however you want to define it, was designed just to stabilize the position. Okay, that was my thinking at the time. And it's a little more complex. If you later and during the trial, you get to see body camera photos, and there's a camera across the street, I guess some kind of police surveillance camera or something. And so there's a lot of different video of this event. And you end up with sort of a, well, the fact of the matter is the rest of his body was actually more prone, stomach down, and then he was kind of turned like that. So it wasn't the ideal position to have him in with somebody having respiratory distress. You also see in the videos, and the body cam videos, the degree of uncontrollability that George Floyd had at the outset. One thing that doesn't seem to be being brought up enough in the trial, I hope it's brought up a little bit, I mean it is in evidence, but it isn't really being discussed a lot yet, is the fact that he was saying, "I can't breathe," almost from the very outset of the encounter with the police. In other words, he didn't just start saying that when he was on the ground with somebody's knee on his neck, and then he started at that point saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." That was not what happened. He was saying he couldn't breathe almost from the beginning, and he was struggling, and he had a perfect chance to simply get seated in the car, a police vehicle, but he said he was claustrophobic and all that, and so it leaves one with sort of an impression here that it's a lot more complex than either what I thought early on, and certainly than what the left-wing media wants you to think too. Basically, so the real question is this really a murder? Is this, and then there's the so-called third-degree murder, which is sort of like the thing where you do something very reckless and dangerous, but you're not really necessarily intending to kill anybody. Apparently that's their law. Each of these states have their own definitions of law. And then there's this second-degree manslaughter, which is which indicates a great degree of negligence, not just a little bit of negligence, but a lot of negligence, okay, resulting in death. And each of them has their own definition. So, and it's as far as the jury instructions are coming out, they're kind of, in fact, on Watching the Watchers, they went through that last night at the beginning of the show, which is kind of, that might be an interesting thing to look at too, to kind of get a little bit more into what is involved in the jury's decision. Then we have the problem that throughout the trial, there's been all kinds of other incidents occurring. The $27 million city settlement, which in my opinion kicked two of what I thought were the most favorable jurors off the case because they said something to the judge in the effect that it might have changed their opinion. But I don't know. I think they at least came in with a better opinion than some of them seemed to. I mean, the jury itself doesn't strike me as a very favorable to Chauvin jury. And remember, this is Minneapolis, which is a very Democrat area, a very liberal area. So you're going to have a bit of a problem, I think, for him, given their general, mindset and everything. So that kind of, kind of gives you the situation on that. As to what the outcome will be, on the other hand, you have dueling experts, okay? And the thing is, the state because of two things. I think, one, the resources the state has to bear, and also the fact that the mass public has been sold on the idea we got to get Chauvin, right? You've got all sorts of top experts coming in, and I think one of them did it for free, I guess because he wants to make this statement and all this sort of thing. And this guy wrote this giant, weighty tome, this book on respiratory illnesses. And so you have this level. On the other hand, you have a fairly good expert on the defense side who holds the idea that he basically died of a heart arrhythmia because it's clear that Floyd suffered from very serious, cardiovascular disease. He had a lot of high blood pressure problems. I mean, really severe high blood pressure to the point that people would send you to the hospital over it immediately. So we're not talking about 150 over 90 or something. We're talking, I think, something a lot worse than that. And so you've got a situation with the stress of the arrest, and apparently, this person had been through criminal justice before. He has quite a little criminal record of his own. So obviously, this put him under incredible stress. He seems to think that the police might shoot him just for arbitrary reasons. I don't think that's too likely if he didn't act up. But this is one of those things, and so obviously he was in high stress. He also had a fentanyl level in his system that has been rated as the cause of death. The prosecution presented evidence of much higher levels of fentanyl, and people were not dead. On the other hand, these are hardcore drug users that are more used to the subject. On the other hand, other people have been pronounced dead just because they had lower level of fentanyl in the system, which maybe does question how good our pronouncing why people die is, really. It may be one of those things where we want to have an answer, and if there's an easy answer and nobody's going to contest it, that might be the answer, rather than some probing, search for truth. If a drug addict is found with 11, nanograms per liter or something like that. Anyway, whatever the amount is, and found dead, that's what he died. If there's no bullet wounds, stab wounds, no evidence of violence or anything, that's probably what he died of, right? And that's kind of the way this thing seems to be. But anyhow, so the question, I guess, comes down to the issue of how analytic the jury is, in my opinion. I would say the situation is more negative for Chauvin than I would have thought early on, but it isn't as negative as it's often portrayed in the press. And so the question then comes down to the jury and the stresses they're under. I mean, we're currently having a riot in a suburb of this area over what is basically an accidental police shooting. I mean, what you really have is a first-class mess-up. What else can I say about it? I mean, it's pretty obvious that she was wanting her taser, and apparently she didn't know her left hand from her right hand. And that kind of thing happens. I mean, there have been car accidents where people wanted to put the car in drive and put it in reverse by mistake, etc. It's one of those kind of mess-ups. These people are human. Police are human, and they're under stress, and if they do something 1,000 times or so, one of them is going to mess something up, and this one happened to be fatal, not just a wound. I mean, how many times does somebody get shot with one bullet and it's fatal? I mean, in these police shootings, particularly when it wasn't necessarily a well-aimed shot. But I think this one kind of went into the guy sideways and, went through multiple organs, and, do I need to say more? That can be very bad. And so, at any rate, I mean, but now everybody's rioting over this one. Well, with that environment, can a jury not know? They're not sequestered. They're not cut off from all news. A trial like this, if you're going to conduct it in that town, the jury should have been sequestered throughout the whole trial, I think. And, of course, this will probably be grounds for appeal. I don't know how that will work out in the long run. But it probably depends on the judges they run into upstream. But that's essentially, kind of what. So it's going to come down to the demeanor of the jury. I think there's definitely reasonable doubt here if you're analytical about it. I mean, and it's also one of those things about how the law is structured and how the jury instructions read. what is common sense? What is reasonable doubt? What's reasonable? I mean, this is not a mathematically precise calculation where you can say, well, there's a 75% probability that it was Chauvin's knee and a 25% probability it was just a heart arrhythmia. So, yeah. Well, so you get into that situation, and so it's well, so it's going to come down to the bias of the jury and who thinks what, and since they're going to be sequestered during the actual, when they're actually having their deliberation. Which to me is a little almost backwards in this case. I mean, they're bound to have a riot is going on in their community. I don't know how they can avoid that. I mean, and it was due to another police officer's action. So it's almost like anybody that votes not guilty is voting for a riot. Of course, one could argue, some people believe no matter what the outcome is, there'll be a riot anyhow. I don't know. I think if he's convicted of the highest murder charge, probably not. But besides, they're already over at the other town rioting there. So, I mean, that distraction riot. Huh? But, I think based on what I've heard, I think I couldn't convict the guy. Because I think the other evidence is there's no real evidence, like I said in the original video, that the knee actually did enough pressure to actually cause death. In fact, now they're really arguing more, I think, that's about the prone position as much as anything else. There's really not that much evidence, really, that blood flow to the brain was cut off by it, or that there was any constriction of the windpipe. So that's, and there's really no damage to the neck that would indicate a lot of force being used. Of course, the experts disagree greatly on how much force was used. So, you're sitting there, so unless you go in there with pretty much a preconceived attitude, it looks to me like if you're objective about it, you'd have to say, well, there clearly is a reasonable doubt. There's also the issue of, what did Chauvin take adequate care to render aid? And of course, that gets into the question of, what was his state of knowledge and focus, seeing he had a hostile crowd heckling him while this was going on. And they did step up the emergency on the paramedics from just a drive here at normal speed, code 2, to a code 3, lights and sirens, get here as fast as you can mode. So it's obvious that they did see there was an issue and they were trying to help out. So it kind of comes down to where you're at. It is not as clear cut as either side thinks it is. I think I vote not guilty based on reasonable doubt, but that's me. But I'm not a Democrat from Minnesota that has to see their city burn again over it, am I? So that's kind of that, but that gives you kind of an update on the Floyd trial and kind of the evolution of my thinking. But still, my original position holds one point of clear merit, and that is that people really did jump to conclusions that things were absolutely clear cut in a way in which they really weren't. Well, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe, give me a like, and comments and feedback would be interesting. Until next time.